Cuomo has tasked the city, the mayor, city council, public safety committee with police reform reinvention collaborative. Here's what we were sent. And the public safety committee was tasked with going through this and coming up with some ways and looking at how we do things in the police department. Obviously, it was over the death of George Floyd. The murder of George Floyd is what really pushed for this. I think it's a good thing. It never hurts to look over things and make sure that we can tweak things the way we're doing things. I know I've talked to the chief on many occasions, and a lot of the stuff that the governor is requesting or asking us to do, Jamestown Police Department is already doing. Obviously, things like body cameras and no chokeholds, and which JPD doesn't do and never has done before with chokeholds or anything like that. So just so everyone is aware, and I think I put it in my email, that this is being recorded. It's not being live streamed, but it is being recorded. It's going to be put on the city website for people to view. Obviously I still want people to be open and upfront about things. And if you have an opinion, that's fine. You have an opinion. For the officers in on this, I talked to the chief, and I said, if someone has an opinion that maybe is not your opinion, they don't need to be worried about getting in any kind of trouble for this, for having an alternate opinion. He's like, absolutely not. His response was, I don't play those games. So if you don't agree with something, or if you want to say something, say it. There's not going to be any kind of retribution against you. So there was a series of questions here, and the ones I chose were kind of different from the other groups. And the reason being was because the other questions kind of didn't fit with some of the people in here being police officers. Like, the one was, your dealings with the Jamestown Police Department. What were they like? Obviously, that wouldn't fit with officers involved. So I had chose some of the other ones we had down, and then if we have time, I threw in an extra one in there on my own about mental health. So I'll just start with the first question, and that was, this is just going to be, people can jump in. If you want to jump in, introduce yourself first before you answer the question, that's fine as well. So the first question was, what are the top 5 services that you believe that are most important for the police department to provide? And if you can't think of 5, or if there's some other ones in there, just basically give what you can think of off the top of your head. It's not 5, that's fine, and anyone can jump in. So once again, what are the top 5 services or services that you believe that are most important for the police department to provide? And anyone can start.
I guess I'll start. I did my homework. So I said the emergency services, and that kind of can be a broad spectrum, anything from crimes, drugs, assisting with accidents. The next one was domestic violence calls with my question sometimes is what's the difference between a peace officer and a police officer? Is there a variation? Are they the same thing? Is someone title an actual peace officer, or is it just one of the police officers? The next one was traffic. I think traffic control here in Jamestown is not what it needs to be. I think that we have to work on that. People, I lived in Austin, Texas, and drove around in a lot of traffic for 4 years. And sometimes I see people driving here and I'm like, what is this? It's a free for all. People not stopping at stop signs, people pulling up into the crosswalk, while they're stopped at a red light in Brooklyn Square, you know, and come on, you know, those are simple things that honestly shouldn't happen. But I truly believe that, you know, a lot of unlicensed operation people won't know all of the rules of the road. Even if you have a driver's license, you have had a driver's license since you were 16 years old. Do you know the rules of the road or remember them? And one of the things that I was gonna suggest, and I don't know if that's to the city or the county, is to maybe make that a requirement every 5 years or so. You have to take a safety course, and online now, you know, you take a 5-hour course over time, and you just have to read stuff and answer a couple questions at the end. And I think that honestly, like, that makes us all a better person. That makes us all better drivers. And if it's not breaking the law in a car, it's on a bike. I mean, you see people driving the wrong way on a bike, not stopping at stop signs, not, you know, abiding by the law. You know, they're still on a bicycle. So, and even walking, I mean, you can't really stop every jaywalker because we would need 7,000 JPD. You know, but public safety is so important, and the word public safety is such a broad word. You know, what is public safety? You know, making sure that people don't die. So one of my things, I kind of talked to Jeff, and this is one thing they do in Austin, Texas, is officers ride motorcycles. You can get to someone faster on a motorcycle, and you're more seen and on a motorcycle. And I think they're pretty cool, and they're, you know, they're easier access, I think, for a police officer to get to a scene, or, you know, to kind of maneuver and watch people than from a car. You know, you have a lot of and you guys have even more, you know, blind spots than we do, because you have the cages, you have this, you have that, you know, you have a monitor, you know, there's so many different things. And even like bicycles when the weather, and honestly, here in Jamestown, the weather has changed so much over the past 5 years that, look at it snowed 3 times, it's December, you know, so motorcycles could be a little bit more of an option than 10 years ago. Number 4 was definitely the drug task force. You know, I think that Jamestown has a great drug task force. Could we have more? Sure. Couldn't every city? Yeah. And I think I put number 5 as mental health services, but I actually think that mental health services is our number 1 problem here in the city. And that's a broad spectrum also. And I think that once we can get some help to the mental health a population that we have here in the city of Jamestown, which is going to take a community to change that. So those are my 5 things. Thank you.
No, maybe I'll just, let me just chime in for a second. You know, the mental health services, you know, as I see it, what I think is that a lot of times an arrest becomes the gateway to, you know, obtaining those kinds of services. Unfortunately, the police, it's very difficult to ask the police to engage in mental health services. A lot of times the mechanism that's available to, you know, in our social fabric is sometimes it is an arrest, or it's at least police intervention. I mean, ultimately, when you get into what are the functions that the police serve, I mean, what I just simply wrote down, it's rudimentary, is enforce the law, you know, and then there's this preventative component, which is to prevent crime. And then ultimately it's to protect the safety of the citizens. You know, I think those are the 3 areas that it's difficult, you know, that's ultimately what the police function is. Everything else comes out of that, you know, but I think when you focus on mental health services, I think you've now hit an area that's a very sensitive issue for police, because
right,
you know, you ultimately want to steer people in the right direction to get the help that's needed, but how do you get them into the system, so to speak, but by way of police intervention? In an ideal world, when there's a problem with my neighbor or a friend, I'll make a phone call, I'll intervene. I don't know, people with churches, they'll do their thing. But when you don't have that available, ultimately it reaches a point where something occurs, the police are called in, or they roll up on the scene and they actually witness it themselves, and then they get involved. The question is, can they be a little bit, how do you then put them in a position where they can enforce the law, protect the safety of the people around them, including the suspect, and then, you know, maybe the system itself can then steer them into mental health.
Yeah, I think it's such a big subject, and we've talked. The last meeting was about mental health, and actually how mental health is something that like you said, the police. It's hard, you know. You go to a scene where someone's having a breakdown, and is it something for the police? You know, no, it's something for a social worker. It's something for a someone that has that training behind them. And I think that that's been the biggest issue, is that the police are always called to every single emergency, no matter what it is, you know.
If I can chime in on that last part, I think the last statement that she made there about the police responding to every emergency there is very accurate. Mostly because we are always available, always on the road, always around, and often can be there quicker than any other department or caseworker or anything like that. And that's why that is usually what happens. And people want us to be able to assist or solve every issue from, you know, like you guys were saying, issues with neighbors to mental health to sometimes medical issues. And with life, that can be any
Overwhelming.
very broad examples of what can happen where they would need assistance.
Would it be fair to say that? Would it be fair to say that over the years, police have kind of been put in a tough situation as far as being a catch-all to everything? Because, like you said, just mere availability 24/7. Does that necessarily mean it's right? Maybe not. I mean, you know that there's many times in the middle of the night at 2:00 in the morning, you're getting called by CPS to respond somewhere, because they don't have anyone out at 2:00 in the morning to respond. So it's put upon the police to go to a house and have the knowledge and make a judgment call if kids are safe or it's a safe environment. And that's a ton of responsibility to put on someone, or to deal with someone that's having some mental health issues, because you're the frontline people that are dealing with that at all hours of the day.
Correct. With what Jason said about enforcing the law, I think that's the old idea of the police, or at least it is to some people, where that was kind of the idea when policing started, and it's transformed into being there for every situation.
All right, drop Jeff.
Anyone else? I'll jump on to the next question if anyone else.
I just like to say that, and sorry, we're supposed to introduce ourselves. I'm a ward with Jamestown Police. I just wanted to say, as a law enforcement officer, everything that is your name Melissa?
Yes.
Okay, everything that Melissa was saying is pretty much what I had written down too when I was emailed these questions. I said domestic violence assistance with mental health, enforcing traffic laws, proactive policing, and just being visible. And then one other one that she didn't mention was school resource officers, which kind of goes with being proactive and visible. So yeah, I think we're on the same page with that.
Yeah, and I think that I watched the school stakeholder meeting, and that they were saying how important that those positions are in the school, because they're just, the kids see the officer in a different light than I don't think that they wear a uniform, because most people are retired. So they wear the red shirts with the police on the back, and it's more like a, you know, a buddy type deal. And I think there was another conversation that had happened, that someone had talked about, you know, maybe getting some courses into the schools. And actually I had that idea also, is, you know, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, there could be like a 7-week course at some time during those years where those children learn about policing, learn about the laws. You know, I mean, we need a crosswalking class where people know how to use a crosswalk. I mean, it comes down to those simple things that people don't even know how to cross the street, you know, and these people are going to be at some point running a meeting like we are. So I think it's important.
Jeff, I was wondering if I could ask the officer, when you say proactive policing, what does that mean to you?
Just kind of not always running to calls that we received, like, you know, someone saying, for example, if you have like a burglary or something, if we're out and about on the streets and we see someone walking up onto a porch that we know the person doesn't live there, if we can see that, be out there and be seeing things like that before we get called there, that's a lot better than getting the call and then getting there after the fact and then having to take more time to investigate it, which takes more people off the road and stuff like that. So that's what I mean by proactive policing.
Thank you.
Or another example of that would be drunk drivers. You know, if you see someone that appears to be all over the road and there's probable cause for a stop, and then the person's intoxicated and you make the arrest for DWI. I mean, that would be another example of proactive police work.
My opinion on that, again, is pretty much the same. It's proactively trying to either prevent a crime or stop a crime in progress. I think when we think of proactive police work, it's deterring crime or engaging in conduct to make arrests. People with warrants, you see them walking down the street, you serve the warrant. Traffic stops, again, as I believe Melissa was saying, with the driving problems, people walking in the roadway, all of that kind of stuff.
Jeff, I just want to say a couple of things. My name is Tobin Disborough. I'm a deputy director here at Chautauqua County Probation, and I want to kind of go back to Matt's point about when everybody thinks of law enforcement, the first thing that everybody thinks about is enforcing laws and preventing crime. And, you know, going back to, I wrote a written statement here, and that's the very first thing that came to my mind as well. And law enforcement, especially in Jamestown, is so much more. I think partly because of lack of resources in the community, lack of mental health resources, and that leads to law enforcement having to step in and do that. You know, so it's important for everybody to understand that being a law enforcement officer these days, and I think Jeff can attest to that too, is a lot different than what it was 20, 15 years ago. There's a lot more to it and a lot more responsibility because of the spotlight is put on everybody. So first of all, I just wanted to thank all the officers and everybody here, Jeff and Jason and Melissa and Vicky, for being here and part of this process. So that's all I had to say right now. Thank you, guys.
If I could add something on the mental health, when you said there's not a lot of resources here in Jamestown. I think there are resources, but they're just not utilized correctly. You know, we have three different entities of mental health in the city. We have the Chautauqua Center, which is brand new. And I think people in the community really don't know what the Chautauqua Center really is. You know, honestly, I don't. I know someone that works there, but I think it's a broad spectrum there too. I think they have licensed physicians, they have licensed psychiatrists and the mental health. And then you go to Chautauqua County Mental Health, which is on the 5th floor of City Hall. And that's a whole nother ball game. And then you have MHA, which is just a bunch of support. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but it's basically just a bunch of support groups for, addicts or people that are trying to get off drugs, LBDGQIS, whatever it is now. They always add a letter, I don't know. But anyway, at trans people, and we have such a severe and broad spectrum of mental illness in the city. And it's been that way for, I would say, at least 12 years. And I'm saying 12 because, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Melissa, I think it's, not the lack of resources too, it's just the knowledge too. There's people don't, everybody lives in their own silos, and so people don't know what is going on with who and where. And sometimes we have the best kept secrets,
right,
in the city. And so people don't know about the resources. They don't know how to connect to the resources. And so there's just got to be a better education about what we have, because we have hundreds of services out here, probably, that help helping people, but who knows about what everybody's, there's how much, even from that call from the mental health, they didn't even know what each other were doing. So if you don't even know what the agencies who are serving the population, they don't know what each other are doing. How do you expect the people who really need the services and people who are connecting people to services to know? So there has to be a great dealing of an awareness piece of everything that's going on in this city.
You need it.
The more we know, the better. Because that's what it says. Our people perish from lack of knowledge.
Yep. Well, and that's it. Like, you need a nucleus, and who's going to be the nucleus? Are you going to make the Chautauqua Center your nucleus, and they're going to be your go-to facility? And then, honestly, like, MHA is great for people, but they have no licensed. As far as my understanding, they have nobody's licensed, nobody's, so it's just like a support group for people that don't know where to go or homeless. It's new to me too, but I do believe that we have great entities here in the city of Jamestown. We just have to all figure out how we can work together. And I think that, I'm born and raised here. I've known people from the JPD. I went to school with Dave Pianos. I went to school with Brandon Maggio. I've known Jeff for a long time, as you go along. And then, and now it seems like there's a lot of younger police officers, which is great, because that means that their knowledge of younger children, that's where we have to go. We have to start to get things in the school system. And when people say, every single one of those stakeholder meetings, everyone said, we need to educate, we need to educate, we need to educate. Well, where do you go to educate? Schools, workplaces, and stuff like that. And I think that right there could help the police in a whole,
I think the key distinguishing factor between the different resources that you're talking about would be that there are programs in place for what I would consider non-emergent mental health issues and emergent or per se in progress mental health issues, where as far as the police department goes, we generally have one channel to assist people or try to provide people with assistance to handle any sort of mental health crisis that's in progress or needs immediate attention. And maybe that is an issue because there's a lot of people that have been through the process multiple times and don't have any confidence in it, and therefore don't have any interest in utilizing it any longer. And then that just causes more issues because we continue to deal with certain individuals that need help, want help in some cases, but don't trust the system. And if it's like I said, an in progress situation like that, we really only have one channel that we utilize, and a lot of people often have no interest in that.
And you saying that there's one option makes me think, why? That shouldn't be. There should be a list and phone numbers and outreach for you guys, because you guys are the first ones there. And if you and I'll tell you a little story about myself. I am adopted by a woman in Jamestown, family in Jamestown, and my mother became severely mentally ill when I was about 7 years old. And there was a lot of times that I had to call the police when there were situations where my mother was manic and my mother was having a seizure, but I didn't know. And a seizure, yes, but there were other times where I had to call the police, and you just call 911 and you get the police, or you get the fire, or you get and back then when I was a little girl, it wasn't like it is today. How many calls, Jeff, did you say that the police respond to a year? Like, I think you told me the statistic.
Tens of thousands a year is what JPD responds to.
That's a lot of calls, and a broad range from child abuse to drugs to burglary. You know what I mean? Like, so many things for just one entity. We need to be better. We need to be better.
I have three.
I'm going to jump on this.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said I have three completely unrelated questions to mental health and unrelated to each other, but for the officers. But you can go right ahead, Jeff, because you're doing the meeting.
No, you go ahead and ask. What Missy said kind of led us into the next question. I was just going to ask about what ways can we improve policing and build better relationships with the community. But while everyone kind of sits on that, go ahead and ask your question, Tamo.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions just because I've talked with the chief about some not frustrations that he was sharing that you guys have or the police department has, as well as talking with another person from the community who has a similar frustration. And so when you talk about CPS, I wonder, from what I understand, CPS may get the call, but it's the officer that has to go do the investigating, and they don't go into the homes. But is that necessarily, or they haven't been, or they, really kind of push it off on the officers? And so I think there was one statement where an officer said to the chief, do you think, he's like, the officer was called and, what are the chances CPS will show up? And it's kind of like this inside joke or inside frustration. And so the same thing happened from the woman who was actually trying to engage with CPS, and she didn't feel like CPS was doing enough and it was falling on law enforcement. And yes, this is a safe space, but I do have a question about that. Is there a relationship that works with the two organizations, or does it seem as though with regard to investigating and doing all of those other things that you kind of get the heavy lifting? If I can ask that question.
Well, I can say that when there's CPS and law enforcement involved, it becomes like two separate cases. So CPS, and I mean, I'm sure you guys are all aware. So we go in and we investigate like the criminal aspect of it. And then they investigate like the long-term life and health of the child. So we really have to work together on that to figure out what's best for the kids. It is a joint effort. And I would say for the most part, we do have a pretty good relationship with them. Just like, I mean, I can't personally think of times where I haven't had a good relationship with them. But I think for the most part, we work pretty well together. We do have to have an open communication about things ongoing. Sometimes what happens is we go in and we see something criminal, and then we always notify them that you need to look into this further, because once they get out of jail, then they can go back to their kids. We can't prevent them from going back to their kids unless the judge puts a stay away order protection in place, which in that case, CPS would be called regardless. So I guess I don't know if this answers your question, but one of the biggest parts of us working together is us going in there and finding out something criminal is happening, whatever it may be, that's putting the kids in danger. And then we notify CPS because unfortunately we're the only ones who've seen these kids and can recognize the situation they're in isn't healthy. So when we notify CPS, that's when they open their case. And from there, their investigation is more of a long-term thing.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I guess I just like, sometimes you must be called for another reason. Is there necessarily always something criminal that you see that you need to notify the CPS for? I mean, you wouldn't necessarily know what to look for if it wasn't like physical abuse or something.
Right. Yeah. Even if we don't make an arrest or find something criminal going on, if we determine the situation is not good for the kids, and that can be a lot of things from their emotional health, their mental health, their physical health, just things they've witnessed, anything like that, that's grounds for us to call CPS. And for us, we're a big when in doubt, we call CPS. And if we call CPS, we can talk with someone and explain the situation to them. And we'll ask them in your professional opinion, you deal with this more. We deal with it a lot, but they deal with it even more. Mm-hmm. So we can, get their opinion on, do you think this is something you guys should open a case on? And, they'll usually ask us, well, do you guys think there's something criminal going on? And, we do have that communication, and it's an 800 number that we call initially 24 hours, but they're really good about connecting us with someone from our county that we can talk to. And if we ask them for that, like, if I say, can I get a number so I can follow up on this, then we're good about working together in that respect. As long as both sides are able to communicate with each other and know what to ask each other.
So what happens if you get called to a location, you go in, that whole situation happens, you call CPS, you ask them to do a case, and then 3 more times you get called back to that same address. What are the next steps?
So in the past, if something like that has happened, and I can't tell you.
Well, yeah, you can't. Yeah.
No, I mean, I just, it goes into the higher ups' hands, so I don't know the exact answer, like what happens from there. But I do know that there's been times where officers have gone to supervisors about things that needed more attention. So, and our supervisors are good about talking to their supervisors, and they usually can come to some conclusion. So, there is, and I can't tell you if they've done that, if it's gone the other way. I don't know for sure. But I do know that our both supervisors or higher up in command, they are in good communication also. And obviously no system is foolproof, unfortunately, and there's been mistakes where, and unfortunate things, not that I can think of personally, like offhand, but I'm not going to say that everybody's perfect, but we do have a good communication in that respect.
And obviously, I mean, pretty much probably everyone on this screen knows this, that police officers are mandated reporters, just like Tamu would be in a school setting. They're all mandated reporters if they see this to hotline stuff in. There was times where I would hotline stuff in and I would get frustrated because it wasn't necessarily a criminal matter, but it was a quality of life issue and the way kids were living. And sometimes those reports would get kicked back. They wouldn't, the state wouldn't take them because, they didn't think it was severe enough, I mean, there's things that I would see and I would be like, well, I know I wouldn't let my children live in these conditions, but they, the powers that be or the state felt or CPS felt that they met at least minimum standards and, they wouldn't open a case, or it wasn't enough for the police to file a criminal charge against. And, that was often frustrating for myself. And I'm sure the officers here on the screen can attest to that as well.
Yeah, 100%. That's very accurate.
I think maybe this is part of what your question was insinuating to an extent. If we go to a call or a house and we contact CPS, it's usually, like Emma said, to a 1-800 number, and then we get called back. I believe it's usually within 30 minutes. I think there's a state requirement. I'm not certain on that they have to call us. One of the local representatives has to call us back. And then we fill them in with basically the same information we provided the hotline, but you're not generally seeing anybody from CPS respond to a scene unless it's a situation that's really bad and some sort of emergency removal of the children is needed, or there's nobody to take custody of the children. So any sort of investigation on CPS's side happens through a paperwork channel and phone calls more so than them being available to respond to the house or to the scene.
Yeah, that's accurate. But on the same note, and just for clarification, we wouldn't leave a scene if the kids were going to really bad, you know, but yeah,
Right.
just on a separate note from what he's saying.
Yeah. And I think that that's where the tough part goes. You know, you see these sometimes deplorable, you know, conditions. And I mean, unfortunately, there's quite a few here in the city, you know, and we do have that, you know, population that it's okay to them, or, you know, situations like you want to try to fix that, but you only have so many hands that you can fix it with. And I think that, you know, if you call a CPS number, 800 number, and it takes 30 minutes to get back to you, I think I think that could be, you know what I mean? Like, how can we make that better?
Absolutely.
How can we make that local, you know?
It's not that they take 30 minutes to get back to us. We call, we talk with whoever's available and file the report. That's what Jeff was saying with sometimes they won't take them if it's not to a certain level. And then once the case is filed, when they accept it, we get a call back from a local representative who would then be assigned the case.
Oh,
So
okay.
Yeah.
and just because they need confirmation and they need to speak to us directly, I believe is the requirement to launch the investigation. And to touch on what Jeff had mentioned about maybe certain people wouldn't let their children live in certain conditions. CPS's requirements for what is necessary is, I would say, below what most people would think it is.
Matt, I think
living
what you're
condition.
looking for is minimum standards.
Yeah, correct.
That's what they go with. It's minimum standards. And
Yes.
I used to work in CPS about 17 years ago. So a lot of this, Jeff, and I don't know where we're going with this group. I don't know if it's a permanent group or not. I don't know how often we're going to meet.
No, we're just meeting today.
Okay. All right.
They did, but didn't Brent say something about ambassadors that maybe could be made off of these groups? Correct, Brent?
Right. Yeah, we'll keep you updated. I'm not sure if we're going to have any more meetings, but definitely there'll be updates.
Okay. All right. It would be good. I would recommend at least some of us, if you'd want to get together and meet with some representatives from CPS, Mental Health Association, just to be more educated on their services and programs. Individually, we could form a group and approach them. I'm willing to lead that or do anything to make that connection. But whatever you guys want to do outside this group, that's fine with me. I'll send out my contact information, and I think it's important to understand what roles everybody has to play in this whole world. It's because it is complicated. So
well, and they all kind of run in a little circle. They all kind of are a little bit connected, because you probably have some of the people that we serve, or the police serve, or the community serves, is that they could use a bunch of branches from those different sources.
Yeah, but somebody said earlier too about silos, how we all have our individual silos and we're working within those individual silos. And so everybody has to be aware of that and conscious of that as we do our job on a daily basis. So
I have a two-pronged question that are kind of connected. I'm sorry, I'm moving us off of CPS because we only have 20 minutes left. So I guess my question, I rode around with Officer Shimmick a couple of weeks ago. I had him bring me home at 4:30 in the morning. I just couldn't hang. But my question for you as officers and who work in this role on a regular basis is kind of two-pronged. And I think the first one is, and he shared a little bit with me, how has the criminal justice reform in New York State impacted the work that you do? And to kind of piggyback off that, if anybody wants to add, what do you wish that the public knew about the work that you did with relationship to either the criminal justice reform or things that maybe might be some misunderstandings that the public has about your job?
Are you talking about bail reform? Is that what you're talking about?
Bail reform, I'm sorry, bail reform, yeah.
Bail reform, okay.
I'll speak since I haven't spoken yet. I'm Doug Weaver. I'm a detective with the police department. Tamu, I think we've kind of talked on this before, but the bail reform, and I think Jason can attest to this at some point, the bail reform has aspects of it, let's put it that way, aspects of the bail reform have handcuffed our abilities and capabilities to rectify situations. Not everyone needs to go to jail. I'm 100% on board with that. But there are people that need to go to jail and stay in jail, and that's not feasible with the current situation that we have with the bail reform. Domestic violence, Emma can attest to it. Reinhardt can attest to it. It's probably our number one calls for service year after year after year. And it's the repeat offenders, and there's essentially not a lot of accountability being held for these repeat offenders. Even with serious crimes, felony charges that are being reduced time and time again, and it's the same people usually over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what he said completely. It's frustrating. I just got the position of domestic violence officer here at Jamestown. So it's frustrating, especially in the domestic violence situations when, someone has been calling an ex or something and threatening some serious, like graphic, serious, planned out things. And it's just a misdemeanor. So of course they sit overnight, but then they're released. And, we have to, it's the victim scared. And in our position, it's how do you explain to somebody that, that unfortunately the judge can't send him somewhere.
So it's kind of like, I feel like you guys are caught in the middle. Because you hear the police call. I feel like you guys are caught. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. To piggyback off of Emma's statement about the victims, we even have situations where the judge will issue this complete stay away order protection. And even with extensive criminal histories, people get arrested, multiple felonies, they get released, and it happens sometimes multiple times in a week. And then when the victims lose confidence in the police's ability to protect them from these people, you can't really blame them when they either don't want to call anymore or have no confidence when we show up. Even if we arrest them there on site, maybe they sit overnight to see the judge in the morning, and then often are released, even as Doug was saying, sometimes
Same day.
2-3 times in a week.
And then people blame you as the
Right.
officer. Like, why didn't they do nothing? They didn't do
Right.
nothing. They didn't tell them nothing. That's why they got out. And that's a stigma here. And that's been a stigma for a while.
Sometimes a lot of the victims that unfortunately have to deal with this understand it and get it. And I would say that it's not necessarily more frequently, but very often the neighbors that are calling because of, hearing fights or seeing, multiple patrol cars at the neighbors' houses are wondering or thinking, because they don't know necessarily the outcome of any of the events, why we're there repeatedly, why we're not keeping this person away, why they have to keep calling, why they have all this next to their house, not knowing that, we're arresting them every time and doing what it is that we can do. It's not enough.
And we've even had suspects tell us, when they're about to get arrested, they say things like, "Oh, I don't care. I'll just be out in an hour." "Oh, I don't care," stuff like that. And it's like,
There's no consequences,
Right.
and they know that, and they're not. And unfortunately, most of them are major manipulators, so they know how to manipulate every situation, because that's why they are the drug dealer living with the girl on HUD. You know, like, I mean, it happens here. You know, when you are on HUD or you are on any kind of section housing, you can't have a friend living with you or a boyfriend. And that man that's coming in on that coach bus from Buffalo selling his drugs out of that house is happening. I mean, it's happening every day, in and out, and it's sad, because they know exactly who to take advantage of. The single mom that gets a big check at the beginning of the year, and she's going to get it quick, and then she's going to give him that money, and he's going to get his drugs, and he's going to sell his drugs, and he's not going to give her back the money. You know,
So
I mean,
Tamara,
sorry,
your question was, what do we want people to, or what do we think people should know?
You know, I think there's a big misunderstanding between the job of a law enforcement officer. I mean, we say serve and protect, but that's such a big umbrella, right? And so I think there are some misunderstandings of what the public may believe law enforcement's role is, and with, you know, with the reforms, or you just things when people say, well, the police aren't going to do anything, or the police are never, you know, just, I know it makes it a challenge for you to kind of be in the middle between the public and the Justice Department. You're in law enforcement, you're not justice. And so that's the question I guess I was having.
I think that when you asked what we think people should know, I think that people should know that we're doing a lot more than can be seen from the public. I know we're over 30,000 calls for the year, and that's a lot more than people probably would imagine, and that we often do handle them in the manner that would be satisfactory to most people. They just don't have the ability to know the outcome. And with the bail reform, obviously, it doesn't appear that way when people are calling over issues, and they call and call and call, and we address them every time. But when there's no repercussions, there's nothing we can do other than continue to respond and address it over and over.
I think one of
that kind of. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to add, I think one of the residual benefits of bail before the reform laws was that when the police would make an arrest, the individual was then removed from the scene and was removed from a DV situation where that person might have been the perpetrator for a period of time. And therefore, you know, the order of protection that would result, of course, was important, but as a practical matter, the person was sitting in jail, they couldn't make bail, you know, and that's important because now you've just alleviated a big problem. So now when people are getting out, in fact, when they're, as you guys are recognizing, it takes probably more time to do the paperwork from the cop's standpoint than it does for them to get out. And their feeling is, why are you hassling me? You know, I got plans later. You're just going to delay me for a couple hours. And then they get out. And then, you know, here's the thing. The judge, Lamacusa, will issue an order of protection. And many times when I'm in the courtroom, I'll see even the victim of the crime doesn't know what to do at that standpoint, because they say, listen, he's just going to come home. He's got nowhere else to go. You know, that's the problem. I got a reality to deal with, or I got to go to work. He's the babysitter. I mean, it then becomes a blend in for all kinds of other, you know, circumstances that the police have no control over. But I think that the worst part about this is it creates an impression with the public that the police aren't doing their job, because they make an arrest. All they see is the police are there. Maybe they're there on the scene for 20 minutes. Maybe it's a half hour. Maybe it's an hour. Person leaves, but then the person is back a couple of hours later. There's a case that's been initiated. It's going to roll through the system, probably churn a little slow. Hopefully we're going to change that. But then the person is back home and the situation starts all over again. So it becomes disheartening for the police, disheartening for the public. There's just nobody feels as if the system itself is really working. At least with the old bail laws, I mean, there were problems, but with the old bail laws, there was a sense that there were people that there were consequences, even if it's on the front end, regardless of whether the case was pled down. There was some type of real world consequence for the arrest, and you don't see it now. Especially, I would say, if the cases aren't being prosecuted the way that they should be, and hopefully that'll change.
I know, I think Doug, you said they do get an appearance ticket, or was that officer shouldn't make that told me, but they don't necessarily even show up for those
Well,
sometimes.
usually with domestic violence, if there's an order of protection requested, I've been off the road, so I'm not 100% sure, but usually for a DV, they're either held until arraignment, then those charges that they were charged with, they used to be able to be sent to jail. And now most of the time the judge can't set bail. So they're basically in jail overnight, see the judge, get released because the judge can't send them to jail. And then we're back to square one. Whereas Jason was alluding to, you know, if there was a violent DV or a DV situation, DV repeat offender, they would be held overnight. They would see the judge, and a good possibility the judge was going to send them to Mayville. And like Jason alluded to, there was more consequences on the front end, and you know, alleviated the situation right then and there. Versus now, okay, I'll go see the judge. I know I'm going to get out in the morning, and we'll be right back to where we are. But people aren't showing up to appearance tickets because why would they? There's no consequences of not showing up for an appearance ticket. Okay, they issue a warrant. Well, I'll get rearrested on my warrant. I'll see the judge and I'll get released. I won't show up to court. I'll get another warrant. So it's just a vicious cycle with no consequences.
And a lot of
the majority of
time.
The majority of the non-domestic violence or domestic incident related arrests are appearance tickets. There's a list in the bail reform that I believe was amended at least once of the few crimes that can be held or then bail be set. But in most cases, you know, a simple possession charge for controlled substance is just an appearance ticket and released.
Kind of going on that domestic violence issue. You know, we do have a women's shelter here that's quite small and can hold only so many people. And I actually have a friend that works there. And, you know, I said, is there a program that those women go to after they can no longer live, you know, in the shelter at the new center? So my question is like, how can we maybe make that better, you know, too? Domestic violence is all over the country. You know, it's not just here in Jamestown. And if we only keep domestic violence, you know, if we only allow someone to be safe for 3 months, you know, what kind of program is that? You know, what's the next step is to get the woman that's been abused for, you know, 15 years, she finally gets away from her abuser. She's got 2 kids living in the shelter. And then 3 months go by and she can't live there anymore. What's the next, you know, she just goes out on her own with no resources, you know?
So it's my understanding, like I just got this position back here in Project Crossroads, the domestic violence unit here at Jamestown Police. It's my understanding that the new center it's a shelter, but it's also a way to connect them with the next step. And I mean, you know someone who works there, so you might have a little, I don't know how much that she's talked to.
Well, you can't really, right. They really can't talk. Like, so it's almost like it's an assumption, actually, kind of, and we know how that goes. So
yeah, no. So when I first got back here, that was one of my biggest questions because, yeah, you don't want it to be a short-term fix because as soon as you know their stay there is up and they go out, it's just going to be the same thing over. And the whole goal is to end the situation. So yeah. It's from my understanding is that they have the next step they have personalized plans and things planned out for the victim, and as long as they want that and they're cooperating with the process, then the new center should set them up so they can be on their own and not feel like they have to go back and depend on the suspect, and you know they can thrive on their own.
No, this is just like how it was mentioned earlier. I think this is outside. You're talking about putting a lot on the police officers, you know, and now we want them to solve the the domestic violence. So I think it's almost like it was mentioned as another group that needs to get together of all the human service agencies, because you know we can't expect law enforcement to come up with an answer, a solution to fix everything that's going on, but you know they can be a part of the solution. But you know, like I have been mentioning in all the stakeholder groups, we're all in this together. And so I think, you know, if it was mentioned, an outside group to get together and get all these groups together, these stakeholders together, and then, you know, and make it more than an hour process, because they're not going to solve everything here in an hour. And
Yeah,
and
I agree.
you know, and it's just something, you know, because every issue is important that's been talked about. But you know, so just so that Jeff, you know, I don't mean to go, but if you had another question or something, you know, to talk to the group.
Well, I'll just throw in one last question for a quick conversation, and then we can all go. And it kind of piggybacks off what you're saying is that there's a lot of things that are put on police officers, a lot of decision making. There's a lot of stuff constantly thrown on them, and it kind of goes along with that question that I had thrown in there, number 5. Was that, you know, not only do police officers need to be, you know, physically fit and able to do the job, but they also have to be mentally fit. 23 years on the job, I saw police officers struggle, whether it be, you know, with personal things like a divorce or internal issues that were going on for one reason or another. I saw people lose their jobs because they were struggling with, you know, as a police officer with mental stuff or issues they were dealing with. The question I have, and you know, might be a little uncomfortable for the uniformed police officers, but do you feel that your department does an adequate job of assisting you when you're struggling? I mean, for example, you know, Doug Weaver, you're a detective. You know, you have to go to Buffalo and say you have to witness the autopsy of a 2-year-old, you know, and you have a 2-year-old at home, and it kind of hits home to you. You feel that there's, you know, adequate mental health services for yourself. I know there's an EAP program, which will pay for, you know, three times, you know, 3 sessions with someone to talk about something. But is there something more that you think that can be done in your department that would assist you when you are personally struggling with stuff that you're dealing with at work or personal issues?
I mean, let's be honest. I think we can all do better in certain areas, and I think that's one of them. I think our supervisors do a decent job of debriefing, especially critical incidents. I'll be honest, I was involved in that plane crash recovery probably a month ago now, on Route 60, and I've seen a lot of things, and that was probably up there top 1, 2, or maybe in top 3 of worst things I've seen. And there is a debrief held, and it was an optional thing. But I personally feel that if police officers are given the option to go, chances are they're not going to go. And if they are, I don't want to say forced, but if they're told that they have to go, if they were there and they were involved, they have to go to this debrief. They don't have to talk, they can just sit there. But I think having them be there and listening to other people talk, I think is better than simply just not going at all and keeping it bundled up inside. We do see things that people don't know we see. Especially I'm on the forensic team, and all the homicides. I mean, I could go on, and we do a decent job, but we could always do better.
One question I had is, when you become a police officer, is there a mental health background check on you?
Yes.
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 Okay.
But it's just a one-time thing.
Yeah. And so, I mean, because we all can do better with our own mental health all around, and the harder your job is and the harder your life is, and unfortunately they always say try to leave your work outside the door when you go in your home, and vice versa. And we all know that that's very hard to do. And with your guys' job, you deal with such that broad spectrum, you know. I know in the faith-based group, they said something about, you know, what could the faith-based group, the churches, do for the police? You know, having a pastor available to you to just talk to, and or even if just pray. You know, I mean, not everybody is faith-based, but we all have somewhat of a willingness to accept that if we're in need. I think
there is a chaplain available. I know there used to be a chaplain available. I think Ben Gearing is still available to the men and women at the police department. So they do have that.
Yeah, I think that we had Pastor Reed of Bethel Baptist in the past also. I think Ben Gearing, I don't think he's been able to come around as much due to COVID. But Pastor Reed, he rode with us quite often, and honestly, I think that really helped a few officers here to have him and just to have someone to talk to. Even if, and he would ride with everybody, even if you don't believe, then he'd want to just get to know officers individually. He never pushed religion on anybody or anything like that, but it was nice to have somebody available, somebody to go to if you are open to it. I think that's a great resource.
Ben had ridden with me a few times before everything with COVID began, so he's been here with that too.
Yeah, he's great when he's allowed to be here.
Yeah. I guess my if someone's going to be working as a police officer, to be making sound decisions on the road, they have to be mentally 100% as well. If they're struggling with issues, if there's hiding, and we all know there's people on the screen that know that there's people that hide and have issues and they don't want to bring them forward because they're afraid of, retribution from management, or, they don't want to lose their career, or, there's people out there, and we've all seen. I personally think not only at the police department, but most police departments need to do a better job at taking care of the men and women within their department when people are struggling, because like Doug said, they see a lot of things. I still have contact with retired members and that were on the FIT team, and officers that were first seen when Dave Mitchell was shot, and what they saw, and they told me they had nightmares for months, and this stuff still sticks with them. So cops are great at taking care of everyone else, or trying to take care of everyone else, but sometimes they're horrible at taking care of themselves. And I just think everyone can do a better job at that. So that kind of closes that. I don't want to hold anyone over anymore.
Hey, Jeff, before I just would like to ask if anybody would like to answer. What would I just like to know? What would you like to see? What gaps would you like to see filled, or what kind of tools would you like to have in your toolbox through this whole process of this whole police reform process? What would be some of the outcomes that you're looking to have come out of this?
I would say I don't remember if it was you, Vicky, or Tamu, or Melissa, but someone was talking about education, and I think there's a lot of educating that the public can do for the police department, but I also think there's a lot of educating that the police department can give the community, and if the community is able and willing to listen to that, I think it would close the gap between the community and the police department pretty significantly. One of which that we've talked about several times already is the calls for service. I mean, we're a city of roughly 30,000 people, and we still have half a month left in the year, and we're already over 30,000+ calls for service. I mean, that's just it's an astronomical number for such a small police department. So if people understood how busy we were, and it's not that we don't care about their call, it's not that we don't want to come and see them, it's simply that there's other, I would say not important, but other in progress calls that require immediate attention versus, hey, I have a package stolen from my porch yesterday. And if the community understands that, and we will get to them as soon as we can, I think that would alleviate a lot of tension between, again, the public and the officers when they arrive on scene.
I think that's why the Citizens Police Academy is a good thing, that the chief's talking about doing is bringing that back where citizens can actually sit and hear the stuff from the police standpoint. And like you said, be educated a little bit and try to bridge that gap between the community and the police that, I think does exist in some sense.
I have one thing to say, or a couple. So I came up with this when Jamestown was having their first Pride meeting. We had a committee, and then COVID happened, so it couldn't happen. But one of the things that I said is that we have to build the unity in the community, and that's the problem I think that we have, is that we've always lived separate. Oh, that's the north side, or that's the west side, or that's the south side, or and we need to stop the stigmas that, oh, that's just Jamestown for you, or only in Jamestown, and figured it's Jamestown. You hear so many people saying those things, is that we need to get people to work together. And I think that that's great. Like Doug said, get the bridge, get that bridge gapped and build that bridge back together. So
to go off of what Doug was saying as well, obviously everybody knows that, in excess of 30,000 calls is a lot of calls. When you put that into perspective with how many officers are working on a shift and how many calls one single officer is handling either on their own or with, maybe one other officer in a shift. When I was on afternoons, I can remember during the summer, we would take probably 20 to 25, if not 30 calls between 3 and 11 per person. And that goes back to the priority of the call, not necessarily that we don't want to respond to certain calls, but when you have that many calls going on in a shift with maybe 3-4 officers to handle them, we can only do so much at once.
So patrolling, if there's 4 calls, there's no patrolling because you're all on a call. So that really kind of hurts, like walking the beat. Whatever happened to that saying, walk the beat,
Right. So if there's 3 officers working the 3 zones, and 2 of them are on a call that's, in progress and there's an arrest made, those 2 cars are tied up, going back to what Jason said with, how much paperwork, again, with the bail reform, with the new discovery requirements that Doug as a detective has to work on, that ties people up, and that's what creates the backlog of past tense calls, packages being stolen, different stuff like that, where the 1 or 2 cars that are available are responding to, people with weapons, people that are fighting and, actively, car accidents. There's a litany of different situations that are happening 24 hours a day that need to be addressed immediately. And some people don't realize the manpower levels and how busy, the department is at different times throughout the day. And, maybe they see a car that's driving somewhere and they want to know why they're not stopping at their house to take their complaint. They could be going to any number of different calls.
And you guys are always the
bridges
first
the gap. A lot of people don't. It bridges the gap because a lot of people don't realize that or know the actual numbers of, calls for service, or how many people are working, how many people are available, how many calls are on the screen that are waiting to be handled.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming. I don't want to keep you guys any longer. I really appreciate it. And like some others said, that we've had numerous of these meetings with different groups. I think we have a couple more to go, and I just want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day and showing up today. And for you men and women working the street, I don't envy you. I miss the camaraderie at times, but I don't always miss the job. And stay safe out there. And you guys all have a great day.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good day.
Bye bye.
Sure.